Welcome, everyone. Yes, welcome to this month's free presentation from the Coalition of American Canyoneers. We're a member-run 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to protecting canyon access, promoting conservation, and advancing education and safety in the canyoneering community across the country. If you'd like to support this work, membership is free and only takes a minute. Just head on over to americancanyoneers.org to join or make a donation. And while you're there, why don't you go check out our merch store? We just restocked it with new summer apparel and sun hoodies and performance tank tops. So every purchase goes right back to our work to helping protect access to canyons and keeping them clean and wild for everyone to enjoy after us. Yeah, so thanks for being here. Tonight, we are going to be talking about all things rope fibers and technology, and we're really excited to welcome Sean Bro from Glacier Black. Um, yeah, for those who don't know, they're a really popular US-based company making canyoning gear, specifically for, I mean, it's good for all environments, but they've kind of really made a name for swiftwater canyons. So throughout this conversation, as Sean's just kind of going over all the things, please go ahead and any questions that you have, throw them up in the chat. We'll kind of have breaks in between different slides and throughout the presentation to go ahead and kind of answer all those questions. So yeah, just go ahead and, ask anything you want to know. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sean.
Thanks, oh, excuse me. But thanks, Ryan. It's an honor to be here and to virtually meet everybody. I'm sure I've met or run into a few of you guys out there at the various rendezvous or anything. But no, it's been a fun journey getting to this point with Glacier Black, and it's been a lot of fun meeting everyone and the feedback and everything has been really, really cool. It's not all been it's all been constructive, and but I mean, it's been a process getting things dialed in. So I appreciate everyone here, and hold on, sorry. Appreciate everyone here. So. Ropes have been kind of just one of the nerdy things that I like to study and learn more about. And when I was in climbing and mountaineering, like it was a lot more simple. Mountaineering got a little bit more technical, where we had, whether it's dry coated, so our ropes, wouldn't freeze or not freeze as much, But that was pretty much it. Just had to worry about, about diameters. But then when I started to do more canyoning, my my nerd tech interest was going off. As it's like, there's a few different options, like what do I need for what, and but then just as I got into a number of things, they just it some of it didn't make sense. And so, I mean, the demand that we have, on our ropes is a lot more than the climbers would, I'd say. The environments we're in are a lot different. And so we need different things. We're setting up, guided rappels and, traverse lines, wet, dry, sandy. So, we are pretty hard on our ropes and sometimes need specific things that, we may or may not have. We're, in sandstone and basalt, which are both horrible on all gear, right? And so, like, when I got into it, kind of the industry standard was polyester. So we had inlay, with the Canyon Fire, great rope, burly, but durable. It seemed hydrophobic, and then Canyon Prime from Sterling. a CST from on rope. And so kind of the go-to standard in canyoneering, here in the US anyway, seemed to be um, a polyester. It was definitely a lot more static. So if you go to canyoning ropes in Europe and everywhere else, they're usually semi-static ropes, a polyester sheath with a nylon core, and they bounce all over the place. And so just the experience we have here is a little bit different. So I was just like, I liked polyester. I liked the durability of the Canyon Fire, but it just was not very hand friendly, And then Canyon Prime is a little bit more hand friendly, but maybe not as durable. The other standard we had was aramid fibers, Kevlar, and the Technora, and so I got Sterling C4. I loved that for a long time. And it served me pretty well here in the Northwest, but then I had bought a brand new one and went down to Utah for a few days. And first canyon, the sandstone just made that thing look like a fuzzy caterpillar, and I was just like, I was wondering what was going on. Is Technora as abrasion resistant as we think it is? It's obviously heat resistant, cut resistant. It's very strong, but the abrasion part, I was wondering why it was, not holding up so well. So I, started to do a kind of a deep dive on a couple things, and with Technora and aramid fibers, the strands are like it's woven together from shorter fibers. So it's like if you took yarn from a sheep, right, and you're weaving together, um, or twisting, together yarn. That's kind of how Technora is made, kind of on a larger scale, and so it's strong, it's connected, but abrasion, especially from sandstone, can really do a number on it. So I started looking at other options, and so from mountaineering and climbing, I've used a lot of Dyneema and Spectra. So I knew the characteristics of that. The rope here, the Canyon Pro. We had ropes that had Dyneema in the core, but nothing in the sheath. And I knew that Dyneema had a lower melting point, but it's just like, hey, well, why aren't we using this more in a sheath? So I started looking at other industries, right? So in the marine industry, they use a lot of ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, which is Dyneema, and a lot of Vectran. And so it's like, what is Vectran, right? And so, like with the Technora, I'll back up. With the Technora, I started noticing more and more just with most ropes, and it was just kind of accepted, and just, that's just the way it was. Like, it would get super fuzzy. And when things would get fuzzy, it would start to hold a lot of water. And then in Utah, Arizona, just the sand would get in there, right? And so just for one, it was hard to clean, but then like it was just the sand seemed to, to start to break down even further and wear down, our carabiners and all that, right? So it's just like there's got to be something else out there. Um, but with that, at the time, that's all I knew was Technora, but I wanted to introduce Dyneema to my sheath, right? Because I wanted to have some more abrasion resistance and stronger. And so my first rope was a Dyneema, a Technora. And I was using the Dyneema to kind of wrap around the Technora to hopefully protect it a little bit and keep it from getting too bloated and fuzzy. And it did a little, but it was just still wasn't what I was really looking for. And then I've also had the Technora in with the Dyneema to kind of keep the Dyneema in check to add some friction, so because a pure Dyneema sheath is very slick and very fast, right? And so I was hoping they would balance each other out a little bit, and it kind of works. So then I found Vectran. But before I get into that, I kind of wanted to show. So there's videos here. I'm sure most of you have already seen these, but I'm going to kind of go through some points. I'm going to stop and start a couple of these videos. And after this, we'll have some questions. So think about some questions as I go through this. So if you look on this left picture here, right? So Ryan first did his rub master test on this rope here. The one on the left is a little bit more yellow. So that's my first Cascade rope. That was the sheath was Technora and a Dyneema. And the one on the left is the current Cascade Newt with Dyneema mixed with Vectran. And um, and these are woven together in yarn. So initially, when you're looking at the wear on this one on the left, it looks like the Technora is wearing off and the Dyneema is underneath, but like it's all woven in that together. And so you'll see this and just kind of how it looks. So I'm going to play this video.
Can you guess which rope I have braided 5,000 times and which one I have braided 1,000 times? This is Newt from Glacier Black. It is canyoneering rope with 50% Vectran and 50% Dyneema. And I ran this over a hardened steel edge 5,000 times. And it doesn't look like it's in great shape, but it looks like it's in better shape than this Technora Dyneema sheath. Now, all the Technora that was rubbing against the edge is very broken. Now, you'll notice in both of these, the Dyneema is doing pretty good considering what I put it through. So Technora doesn't like to be bent.
So he kind of goes into just kind of talking about, a Technora and how it doesn't have to go over a bend. And he, he tested to whether a bend versus an edge is different. And it is, so edge is obviously more abrasive. And then, so here's the original full video here.
Rubbing 1,000 times, it's looking pretty fuzzy. You don't have a ton of weight on it because that's such a sharp edge on this rock.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
But I think it wore down. Take it off the machine and see how it looks. So this looks like lint in a dryer, but it's the Technora. This edge is really sharp, but look how polished that is. So that's what it's supposed to look like. But all the Technora broke. Now, Technora is supposed to be abrasion resistant, and granted it is, but Dyneema doesn't really have any friction. Let's see how much weaker this is. No way, it did not break here. It broke in the knot. In case you're curious what the core looks like, and the sheath. Let's see what this looks like. With half the sheath missing, it opens up so easy. The core is just fine. Looks like I'm gonna.
So yeah, with that, right? So it's interesting. The Technora just kind of completely abraded away, and all that was left was the Dyneema that was there. Same thing on the Technora and the Vectran and Dyneema rope. But you saw that the Vectran, the one back over here, was
hardened steel edge 5,000 times, and it doesn't look like it's been crazy.
Well, that's a lot less fuzzy. You can see the fibers a little bit longer, right? And so it kind of helped validate what I was finding in the field on the durability of an aramid fiber that we had as kind of the gold standard for our abrasion heat resistant ropes, right? And it still is great for heat. It's still a great fiber. It's just for what I was wanting to achieve with that rope, it just wasn't what I was wanting, right? And then the other kind of difference that I was playing with and found was the way we weave the ropes, right? So the sheath. If you look at, like, for instance, the Canyon Fire and the Canyon Prime, they're both made out of 100% polyester, but they handle, and I mean, totally different. They're one's stiff, one's more pliable. The Canyon Fire is way more burly and way more durable. And so why is that, right? So it's all about how the sheath is woven. And then also with coatings on ropes, so coatings can make a difference. And so this video in the middle here kind of shows the difference between when you have fibers more twisted on each other versus just an overlapping weave.
I rubbed this rope over this carabiner with 40 pounds hanging on it over 20,000 times. That's 6 kilometers. This part of the rope I did not rub, but you can see here it's a little bit fatter where it did. 10.2 versus 9.1. What's crazy is I rubbed this other rope only 10,000 times with half the weight, and you can see how much fuzzy.
So you can see that there where you just had like single strands of that red and white one, right? These are just kind of single strands. They could be a double strands, but they're in line with each other. When you look over here on the left, there's double strands, obviously, and they're also a little bit more twisted. And so it just adds a little bit more abrasion resistance because all the fibers are kind of working with each other, as opposed to leaving stragglers, out there, to get more abraded. So we can stop there for any questions. I think Ryan has a few there.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. All right.
Yeah.
So Josh has a heavy hitting question in the comments. And it's a little long with a couple different points in there, but says thoughts on the new UIAA 110 standard. I I don't know, I gotta have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure that that new standard kind of deals with like no minimum rope diameter, like has elongation limits. You might need to Google it. As Sean's talking about, I might the other parts, I might Google it, try to get some more information.
Yeah.
But it says, I anticipate these ropes to use UHMWPE in the sheath more. Do you anticipate friction heating issues at these smaller diameters? How does the friction heating issue compare between 100% UHMWPE and mixtures with LCP or PE? Um, and then kind of finishes the question with Stockman's and steel tests show that the low coefficient of friction of and steel is what prevents overheating. Do you think that the higher coefficient of friction of mixed sheets can create a concern?
So yeah, so that's a great question, and that kind of goes into our next portion of this, right? And so a couple things there. Yeah, so um, the new certification, or the UIAA 110, right? That's brand new this year. I'm excited about it because before, I mean, like, if you look at any canyon rope from any manufacturer, Blue Water, Sterling, Petzl, none of them have a certification, a UIAA certification for rappelling, right? They're smaller diameter ones. They may have an EN 564, or something for an accessory cord, but there was like no standard for any of our ropes, right? And so that's, at the time, it made it easy for me to get in, because like as I was getting into this, I was like, okay, well, like, what do I have to meet, right? And so there was no standards, no testing, and so unfortunately for the community, like, anyone can kind of make a rope and put it out there, right? Um, and so that's one thing I'm glad that finally the UIAA has recognized there's a static market out there, because the EN 1891 with the semi-static A and B just doesn't fit with what we are going to, or what we want. So the new standards very specific to certain things. All my ropes fit. I'm in the process of having my ropes tested. With that, there's only 3 centers in the world that are qualified or set up to test those. None in the U.S., none in North America, South America. they're all over in Europe. So I'm in the process of doing that. Yes, on the lower coefficient, right? So when I'll go to the next slide here, let me see if I can get, shoot. Let me,
And then
oh,
for everyone that's tuned in right now, I just put a link in the chat to the UIA website about that standard. There's a PDF you can browse through.
sorry, I keep hitting. There we go. Okay. Can you guys see the Vectran slide?
Yeah, you're still good.
Okay. So yeah, so I'll touch on the other pieces of the friction coefficients, and so a little bit about Vectran, real quick. You know, was there any other questions that you wanted me to address, or was that the only one at that time?
I think that's the only one in the chat right
Okay.
now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as I started doing more research, right? So I wanted something to pair with the Dyneema, right? So I've used, or there's a in the climbing industry, there's only like one rope out there that is mostly um, I'm going to say HMPEs to stop using a Dyneema, and UHMW or UHWMPE is too long. So HMPE um, is very slick, right? And using pure line in canyon or in mountaineering, it's great rope, very strong, very durable, but it's limited just because of the texture of it and the diameter. It's a 6 mil of slick stuff. So I wanted to add something into it. So that's why I initially added Technora. But then I found Vectran. In the marine industry, they use a lot of Vectran and Dyneema in the sheath and the core. And one thing I found with Vectran is it has similar characteristics to a HMPE and also to an aramid. So it has a higher melting point than polyester or any of the other polymer or a plastics, right? But not as high as an aramid. And in most cases, do we need that much heat resistance, right, to where it's fire resistant? Because if we have a lower friction coefficient, one thing we found, and I'll show on the next slide, is that HMPE has a lower friction coefficient, so it takes a lot of friction for it to get up to that melting point, right? So it's not as much of an issue as we thought it was. Um, and so it's stronger, it's lighter, and then Vectran goes right with it because it has kind of a similar characteristics. With Vectran, there's no creep, and so it doesn't stretch out over time, and it's not as slick or low friction as HMPE. But it's because it's a longer fibers, it doesn't get all fuzzy. It's very hydrophobic, so it's similar hydrophobicness or hydrophobicity, whatever, to HMPE, right? So for us, trying to keep our ropes light and dry and not absorb a bunch of, or take on a bunch of sand and debris, they work very well together. Um, and and so, yeah, the issue we have with HMPE is we're always afraid it's going to melt, right? Because of that 120 degrees, which some days in Utah, it's above, it feels like it's above that, right? And then our devices get hot. So why do our devices get so hot? Because of the friction, right? And so, if you have lower friction, then it's not going to get as hot. Then why I wanted some of the other fibers in there is to kind of help dissipate some of that heat as well. So a little bit, even if it gets a little hot, then it's not going to be as bad. So I found that having the Vectran in there, or even other polyester in there, does really, really well. So there's other ropes like CE4Y that has polyester and Dyneema or HMPE. They'll have like a Kevlar or Technora or some aramid, and they all, as far as friction and heat, do really, really well together. Um, and then mixing the way I mix the weaves together, is I initially had just lapped over, as you saw in that original video with Ryan, or how not to. The initial white and tan was just flipped over, so they weren't able to protect each other that much. But then with the twisted yarn into a weave was a lot better. So I found that helps out a lot. Um, was there a question, Ryan?
Mm, sort of. All right, we got Willie in the chat saying, regardless of the coefficient of friction, all the potential energy of a repel has to go into heat somewhere, either as friction from the rope to the device or internally in the rope. However, the heat can be spread out over more surface area over a lower coefficient of friction of rope. It just needs more wrapping. So I don't know if that's really a question, but a great tack
Yeah.
on by Willie. Uh,
Is that Willie Hunt?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's a an encyclopedia of knowledge, and I respect everything he says and has. Yeah, so it still gets hot, right? It's still there, and I'll talk on. I've heard two incidences where so is in the desert on a long rappel, and the newt was glazed, right? Um, and he was using a titanium scarab. So titanium doesn't dissipate heat as well as aluminum does. It's a great metal for lots of things, but heat is not one of them. And but to be fair, in that same weekend or same trip, the same guy also glazed the canyon fire, right? So the rope wasn't melted like this picture. It wasn't falling apart. It just glazed. And we've all seen glazed polyester, glazed nylon ropes, right? And so it happens, and when it happens, we need to retire that rope, you know. So that's why I also have options, right? So, and then I came out with a new rope that has Technora or an aramid fiber in it mixed with Vectran. So it's kind of the best of both worlds in that instance. And it's been doing pretty well. So it's not like I'm totally anti Technora or aramid, and it has its purpose, right? But do we need that on every single rappel, every single rope we have? Is it really a big concern, right? And we found that, because of the lower friction, and if we had a super hot device, right, a lot of friction, it's heated up, and we stopped in one spot, what's going to happen, right? Yeah, you could potentially really melt your rope. You could also really melt a polyester rope at that as well, right? So that's why a nice smooth descent is crucial. And if you know that you're going to be, on really long rappels, and heat's an issue, then use a different rope. I've had people use javelin and newts on long rappels, and they work fine. The other thing is, if you're in a wet canyon, it's not an issue. If you're in a canyon where there's water, right? So if you keep your rope a little wet, then it's not going to be as much of an issue. So there are ways to mitigate those risks as well. So, any questions or responses on that?
Yeah, Sean. So we got James asking, with their experience with UHMPE in general, is that it has a fairly high thermal expansion rate. Would a 100-foot rope in 100-degree, like summer weather, become fairly shorter, say at 50-degree winter weather?
Yeah. Yes, right. So, all of our fibers have different characteristics when they're cold versus hot versus wet and dry. HMP also, shrinks, a fair amount more than other fibers. Yeah. So, um, it, depending on what you're using it for, you expect some variations, right? Some things are going to be more brittle, stiffer. It could shrink, it could expand. And that's where, like, an aramid fiber, is made for those extreme heat differences, right? So if you are one that, constantly, goes from hot to cold, whatever, maybe have a rope that's not, that hasn't gone back and forth a bunch of times to degrade those fibers. Did that answer the question, you think?
Yeah, and Willie tacked on his also his perspective as well, which sounds like it rounded out. It's kind of a
Yeah.
lot to repeat back, so for those
Yeah,
tuning in,
no,
if
it's
you just
fine.
want to read that, that's you can probably read that in the chat.
Yeah.
But question for you, Sean, like, is there for you personally, like, is there at what length of rappel do you start to become concerned about heat and glazing and potentially mitigating that? And what would you do to mitigate it?
Yeah, me personally, right? So if I'm, doing anything over 150 to, 200 feet, I'm a heavy person as well. So I need a little extra friction depending on what rope, I'm using. Um, so mitigate that. I try to do nice, smooth descents, right? So if you have, the dialed in friction on your device to where all the friction's going through the device where it's smoother, you're never on one spot for that long, right? So, I'm not worried about me melting through a rope. If I was doing a 300-foot, rappel, I would, you know, me personally, I would probably use a Trident, or the B-52. Just like I've been on, 200-foot rappels with a newt, and I haven't had any issues. And I haven't, seen other people in my group have issues. But if you're concerned, there's options out there. You know, so but that's what I would do. Anything over, you know, 200, hot day, lots of people, but if it's just me and a couple people, and I'm able to wet my rope as well. So if I have, a wet newt, I'm not as concerned. And a lot of, even in the desert, right? A lot of our canyons have, potholes. And if they don't, if you're completely dry, then if you're worried about it, bring a little bit extra water and just, soak your rope. And it actually, gives you a nice, smooth rappel as well. But so yeah,
Willie
did that
also
answer?
gets his stamp of approval using a spray bottle.
Yeah, yeah. It's just little things, right, that we may not think about, but that's like if you want to be 100%, confident, then get 100%, and 100% aramid rope, and it's not going to be an issue, right? Um, but there could be other issues that you have to mitigate, and but even like so, the B-52. Why I came out with that. So that has, an aramid and Vectran in the sheath with 100% HMPE core, 8 mil. So, it's going to go right in line with the Canyon Pro from Blue Water. You know, it's maybe a tad lighter because of the Vectran that's mixed in there. So a little bit lighter, and a little bit less hydrophobic, or a little bit more hydrophobic as well.
We got a question from Patrick, kind of in reference about glazing in single spots and kind of isolating on the rope. Says it's their understanding that the new rope instructions state to not rappel over 200 feet in a dry canyon without stopping and letting the device cool down. How does that kind of work in relation about what you're saying in terms of, heat being a specific spot on the rope?
So yeah, so me as a person, you ask me personally what I do. is different than what I have to say as a manufacturer, right? So as a manufacturer, I have to be ultra conservative, right? Um, and even with my warning, I've been a little bit more. I put it in. Um, you know, I'm not as uh, cautious as say, I mean, as other ropes with similar issues, initially said do not use, without like in a non-wet environment, right? So just through experience, I've this is not an issue in these situations. So that's where I've come up with 200 feet, and no titanium. That's the only thing I recommend if you're doing a long rappel. No titanium devices. Would it work, in shorter rappels in a wet rope? Sure. I haven't personally tested it. I mean, company hasn't tested it. So me as a company, Glacier Black's going to be more conservative. If you ask me personally what I would do, which I know there's that gray hard area, right? But I just have to be a lot more conservative as a company, telling you the hard lines, right? But as long as you are smooth rappel all the way through, even if the dry rope you're on, a critter, a squirrel, whatever, I would advise not to stop, right? And I know sometimes we may have to, whether it's for rescue purposes or just to, I mean, like if there's a knot or whatever, right? So just be cognizant of what situation you're going to be in and plan accordingly. If you know that there's a knot down there, 150 feet down, right, and your device may be a little warm, maybe it brings some water to spray on to cool down just in case, right? But that's why I've kind of put the other fibers in there and the weave that I have in there, so it's less likely to glaze and have an issue. And if it does glaze, um, I mean, you're still going to be okay getting down. The core is still very, very strong. The rest of the fibers, so it's not like you're just going to, I mean, if you're glazing, it's not you're still going to be able to get down through that. If you have a larger group and you're all glazing it right, then that's probably not the best rope to use for a larger group on a large rappel.
So are you saying that it's better to keep going in one continuous motion but be smooth? But if you did have to stop, you're not concerned about melting through the rope.
No. Yeah, I mean, for you to melt through the whole sheath, I mean, could it happen? Right? Yes. Is it? I mean, I'm not going to say I can't say like it's not going to happen. Um, but you're going to most likely glaze and start to melt the outer fibers, right? Um, and if you were to, have, a 200, a 250-degree critter, that you're stopping in one spot, you're going to melt a lot more. That it's not going to, it shouldn't hopefully look like this picture. But I mean, if you're doing that on on a nylon rope, it's going to melt. If you're doing that on a polyester rope, it's going to melt. You know, so we just have to be just a little bit more careful in dealing with Dyneema or HMPE. But with the other fiber, right? So it's roughly a 1-to-1 ratio in the sheath. And the way that I have it all twisted, like I'll show you, get pictures. You have lots of other fibers mixed in with it, so you don't have just sections of HMPE getting melted. So I feel comfortable with it. I haven't heard in any testing there's no issues, and the only issue I've heard from the field has been the titanium scare of glaze the newt, but it also glazed the canyon fire. So
Um, I think what Patrick's trying to get some clarification here. Because the instructions say stop, is that like the recommended thing?
so maybe I miss. So yeah, so the intent is to just a continuous, nice, smooth rappel versus lots of friction, and then stop, and then stop. Because when you go fast, right, and you're bounding and going fast and having lots of fun, that's creating a lot of friction. It's also the speed and the force, and then when you stop, right, and then you keep going. So that stopping gives you opportunity to apply the heat to the fiber without moving. But if you're just a continuous, nice, smooth rappel, you're never on one spot that long, right?
Right. Eric's got a question. Understanding that naturally repel devices cause some degree of twisting, have you studied ropes or materials that cause more twisting while repelling than others? And if so, what have you noticed?
So most standard figure eight style device was a figure eight, a critter, a hoodoo, the pivot, the axle, the okas. I mean, every standard figure eight style a device causes about the same amount of twist, right? The squirrel from Blue Gnome, I mean, is also, I think, probably in the canyoneering world is probably the best device to limit the amount of twisting in there. There's other things that we do in canyoneering that put more twists in our rope, right? And it's not necessarily, or you can mitigate the twist, right? So if you just throw the bag down, right? So your tail up, but throw the bag down, and at that, like at that point, you're in essence you're repelling into the bag. The twists have nowhere to go, right? So that's going to cause issues. If you're repelling, still tail up with hanging the bag, repelling out of the bag, those twists have nowhere to go, right? So they're building up. Um, so that's why, like in climbing, an ATC style of tubular is your best option, right? But in canyoneering, we try to avoid people using ATCs because it causes, so there's other safety issues we have to worry about. But quick answer, the squirrel is probably the best option to limit the amount of twist. But there's also some rope technologies as well that I've been working on. Some of my ropes, historically have it's, I mean, torsionally stiff, but because the sheath and core are separate, once that core or the sheath wraps and turns around, the twists stay in the rope more. So if you have a rope that has a bonded core, so the core and sheath are acting as one, the rope will twist less as well. So that's the next thing that I have coming out.
Are there certain fibers that you found that twist more or less than other fibers?
It's not necessarily fibers per se. It's the way it's woven. So like a more supple rope is going to twist more, right? So the Canyon Fire is very stiff overall. I think it twists more or twists less. Sorry, and that's what I was trying to achieve initially with my double braided ropes was to hopefully keep it torsionally strong to where like it would resist twisting. And it did in some instances, but in a lot of instances made it worse because once the sheath flipped over, right? So if you have a rope that has a double braided core, they may twist a little bit more or they may hold a twist a little bit more, right? So if you have, and so this would be a double braided. So you have the braid on the outside and then you have the braid on the inside. And then you have like a normal strand, linear strands right? So you have your sheath, and then all these are separate. I've found that these twist or hold a twist a little bit less, so they recover a lot better. And all my ropes going forward have the linear strands. I've moved away from the double braided.
What about like shrinkage and bloat over time? Are there certain fibers or blends that bloat more or less, and about how much should we roughly expect to lose in rope length over time?
Yeah. So all fibers shrink a little bit. The bloat comes from the fibers breaking down, right? And so um, polyester, aramids, Dyneema, Vectran are all pretty resistant to the breakdown, but like I've found Technora ropes would get a lot more puffier than a lot of the other ones. If you have a 100% polyester rope, um, I've seen some get kind of puffy, but what happens, I think, where we get some things where they're more puffy than others, if you look at that, it's in the area we're using a lot, right? So in that video where Ryan tested that black rope, right? So it got bigger as it was going over 10,000 times. Why? Because those fibers are kind of moved apart from each other, moved away from the core as well. And so, and then all the ropes, the core can slide over, or the sheath can slide over the core. And so you may have like the finger traps, right? So you push from one side and then the fibers expand. So it can be a little puffy over that area and it's a tighter here and here. So you'll have sections where the core has or the sheath has moved over the core and it's more puffy in that area because the fibers are looser. And so that's another reason why I've been looking at if we have a bonded sheath and core, will that help that from happening? Do you have a more consistent feel along the whole rope and it stays that way?
Awesome. Eric has another question. Just kind of would you be willing to kind of dive into the pros and cons of the inlay slither? But I think you can maybe, if you want to touch on that, it can kind of bleed into this next section you're kind of going into
Yeah.
anyways. Um,
Yeah.
Maybe we could just kind of
Um,
move forward to that part.
yeah. So the inlay slither, I think, is a great rope. And when I found out that Willie talked Tom into making a nice supple rope instead of another stiff rope, because he said that Tom wanted to make it super stiff, right? And Willie talked him, I heard that Willie mentioned, let's go with a nice supple one. And I think the community has accepted that rope, and they like it a lot. I would compare that to the Canyon Pro from um, Blue Water, right? And then um, and then the other equivalent, would be the B-52 Ghost that just came out. So those three ropes, I think, on the market are the most similar. The Dyneema core, aramid sheath, um, and what's nice about like the slither, some people like it, is it's narrow diameter, but it's nice and supple and flute and kind of so when you load it and it's going through your device, it flattens out, right? So you have the weight of an 8 mil, but maybe when you're rappelling, it feels more like a 9. And so some people think the slither's really fast. Other people, they like it's nice and smooth. The Blue Water Canyon Pro is a little bit different. It's a little bit more. it keeps its shape a little more similar to the B-52 Ghost. And so, but yeah, with the aramid in there, right? I think it's been doing great. It just me personally, like, I'm like, I don't like 100% aramid sheath, but
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that was helpful. James asking, what can we talk about core shot for a moment? What causes it? Most importantly, how do you determine when to stop using it?
Yeah, great question, right? So the term core shot has always confused me, because like we as climbers and canyoneers, we will call a core shot. So we will classify different failures as a core shot, right? If the core can be or the sheath can be completely intact, but then if we bend it over and it flattens, right, that's a core shot. Or if we have sheath worn out and the core is exposed, that's a core shot, and that's kind of like the opposite, right? And so if you have a violation of the sheath, um, there's been different tests out there, and it's interesting. Me personally, I would always like if I'm like in canyon, or even if I want to salvage the rope, I would isolate the core shot with an alpine butterfly and use that on my pull side, right? If it was kind of fuzzy, not really a true core shot to where like I'm worried about sheath failure, then I'm like I feel comfortable, but I would still use that as my pull side, isolated with an alpine butterfly. And then I knew if I needed to use it or whatever, I could, or just pass a knot, right? Um, but if you truly violated your sheath, the core's all exposed, you know, most ropes, that rope is done as that length, right? You're more than, you cut it and you know, um, now you have, two ropes. Um, and
What's
so
what's your litmus test for like what's too much? Like at what point would you
if
say,
I see the
okay,
core, right? So if I truly see the core, so if I'm worried about a sheath violation, so I don't necessarily consider. I mean, we'll call it a core shot, but I don't consider the sheath violation, a core shot because my core is still fine. It's but now I'm worried about my sheath ripping and exposing my core completely, right? So if I'm on a standard rope and I see core, like even if it's, just, I mean, like if there's core showing, I will isolate that section. But there's a study or there is a testing. One group tested it, which is stronger. Now you've introduced a knot to that system, right? Which is stronger? A violated sheath, where you have a little bit of core showing, or an alpine butterfly. And the alpine butterfly broke first, right? So, well, I'm never going to use an alpine butterfly again or any knot to isolate, right? The amount of forces that it took to break any knot, a butterfly, a figure eight, it's in the 8 to 12 kilonewtons, right? If you're putting that much consistent forces on your ropes, even with me on there, you're doing something wrong, right? I wouldn't use that as a guideline, right? But you use another rope as a guideline. But if, but why I isolate it is I want to protect that from getting more abraded, because if we don't isolate it, we can't see it. Then what if I put that on an edge? Now I get even more sheath worn out. Now I can start to slip. And that's kind of where, like, I mean, I keep bringing this up, but if you have a bonded core, and we've seen this with Bial, right? Bial is the only, well, so they're not, so Bial and Edelrid and Cordis, they all have bonded cores. And so if you have a sheath violation where your core is exposed, that rope is as strong as it was before for the most part, right? But the fear is I'm going to violate my sheath more, and that sheath's going to just slip out, right? And this has happened, to a number of people, and that's scary. That would be my worry with a violated sheath. If the core is truly shot, I feel like there's nothing in there, right? The sheath can be intact. I would still isolate that with an alpine butterfly, finish my canyon, right? And then, I mean, at the end, I could cut that rope in half. So we all have different levels of get risk acceptance. But me, if I see the core or I know the core is no good, then I isolate that. I'll finish my canyon, and then when I get down, I'll cut it, and now I have two ropes.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.
Any other questions? How are we doing on
I
time?
Yeah, we're kind of getting close to
Yeah.
the end here. Probably got next 5 or 10 minutes. Let me
Let me
see.
go to just to show this picture real quick.
Yeah.
All right, so you can kind of see all my ropes now have a similar design, where all the fibers are all twisted together. This helps protect. They're all linked, right? So the pink one is the Newt with the Vectran and HMPE. This blue one is the egress. It's basically 33% polyester. I mean, no, I'm sorry, that's the Trident. There's 80% polyester, 20% Dyneema or HMPE, and then it has an HMPE polypropylene core. All three of these ropes here all have the same core. And then the Trident, right, is 33% polyester, Vectran, and HMPE. And then these next ropes, the yellow one here is a full HMPE core. And then this is the Ghost down here. It's a Vectran aramid with an HMPE core. And you can kind of see these if you look at this picture on the far lower right hand corner, the two strands in the middle are it's a different weave style than the others, and so you'll see the outer ones are really fuzzy, and so that's the aramid versus Vectran. Oops. So, but that's pretty much all I have for that. Real plug, real quick, right? Just for bonded rope. So it's a big thing that I wanted to push into was bonded core with ropes, because I think it helps us mitigate a lot of these questions and concerns of rope twist, puffiness, bloat, and then if we have a core shot, right? So if we have core shots, violated sheets, if they're bonded together, as a long line with the twisted fibers, we're no longer just reliant upon one portion of the rope, right? Where the whole rope is working as one piece, and so it can definitely help. And so all my ropes now have the Stratafuse core, and so very similar to the Bial Unicore, the Edelrid, and then the Cordis ropes. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Willie wants to know if you will have the Stratafuse for sale at the P&W Rondi.
Yes.
Um, okay, so we have a good question here. Is the addition of the Vectran allowing for a tighter weave also the reason the Newt creates twists easily?
So the new twist, it's a supple fiber, right? So like I have a Vectran in the Trident as well, but part of the twist is the suppleness of it. And because I had the double braided core, I found that so with the core on the inside being braided together as one rope, as the sheath, because of the friction, the low friction from the Dyneema on the sheath and the Dyneema on the core, they just slid right around each other, right? And so, even though it was initially torsionally stiff, individually, like the sheath would just slide over and twist, and it would stay. And so, I found with, I mean, a bonded pour would have fixed that, but I did some testing with just the linear strands, and it doesn't stay twisted as much. So I initially wanted double braided, so you have basically two ropes, you know, within one, but just overall um, because of the HMPE sliding on each other allowed it to twist more. And then because of the double braided core, it stayed twisted as opposed to kind of rolling back. So I don't know. I mean, that's what we found out why the newt twisted or why it twisted and stayed twisted more. Some people didn't have any issues, but some people, so it was just inconsistent, which I didn't like. I don't like inconsistencies. And so that's why I also moved to the Stratafuse. I found that it uh, reduced that significantly.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we are at time, and that looks like we kind of touched on everyone's questions as well. Oh, wait, maybe one more person. All right, we got time for one more question. James wants to clarify his question. If you're in a canyon and your sheath is violated or failed, but you still might need to use the rope to finish the canyon, can you rely on just the core strands?
So it depends on your rope. Yeah. So all the strength is in your core, right? That's kind of the historically in ropes, all the strength comes from the core. That's why my 6.5 polywog has the same strength as my 8.5 get 9.5 ropes because it's all from the core. Um, so yes, you could. If I didn't have a bonded core, I would be super nervous of just that sliding off, right? So the outer sheet. So I would just, to be safe, I would just, would do an alpine butterfly or cut it, right, and do, a double fisherman's or an overhand, whatever your knot of choice and comfort is. But like if the rope is still intact, I would just connect it with or bypass it with an alpine butterfly, and then if you have to use that length, then you're just going to pass a knot.
Cool. Well, I think you hit on everyone's questions. A lot of people are just saying thanks so much for the chat. So yeah, we'll go ahead and conclude it here. Sean, thanks so much for taking the time to dive into this. You brought a lot of material to the table. I hope everyone found this to be helpful and useful. And yeah, if you appreciate what we're doing, consider heading on over to the Coalition of American Canyoneers website and consider becoming a member. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everyone,
Thank
and
you
we'll
very
see you on the
much.
next
Thank
one.
you. Yeah, I mean, and feel free to reach out, to me via email or text if you have my number. Call me or text. But I'm available at Sean at Glacier Black anytime. So, and if you have ideas or any suggestions, let me know.